When my son got married, I kept a $78 million trust completely secret. My late wife left it to me, and I never breathed a word of it to a living soul. It turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did in 70 years of life. Because exactly 7 days after the wedding, his brand new wife showed up uninvited on my front porch, with a slick corporate lawyer standing at her side. What she demanded, and what I later discovered they were truly planning, shattered everything I believed about my own family. But they made one fatal mistake. They looked at my gray hair and my old pickup truck, and they decided I was defenseless. If you have ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your worth, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe, because you will not believe how this one ends. One honest note before we begin. This story is a work of fiction. The voice you are hearing and the images you are seeing are AI-assisted. Names, places, and events are invented for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. But the lessons about family, greed, and quiet strength are very real. Now, let us begin. My name is Gerald Prescott. I am 70 years old, a retired structural engineer, and for the last 4 decades I have lived a quiet, unassuming life in a modest ranch house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. It is a house built on memories. Every floorboard, every creaking hinge holds a piece of the life I shared with my late wife, Rosalind. When she passed away, she left behind a fortune from the sale of a single materials patent she had spent her whole career perfecting. $78 million, locked away in a private trust that only I controlled. But I never touched it. I kept living on my basic pension. I kept driving my old pickup. I wanted my son, Nathan, to learn the value of building something with his own 2 hands, exactly the way his mother and I had. So I guarded that secret with everything I had. I want to be clear about why I did it, because it matters to everything that came after. Rosalind and I had built our life the hard way, on double shifts and cheap coffee and a single good idea she refused to abandon. When the patent finally sold, she did not celebrate by buying a mansion. She held my hand across our small kitchen table and told me she was afraid of what that kind of money does to a person who has not earned it. She had watched it hollow out her own brother years before. So we made a quiet agreement together. The fortune would stay hidden, growing in the dark, until it could go to people who would use it to build something and not merely to spend. Nathan would inherit our work ethic first, and only later, if he proved himself worthy, the rest of it. I kept that promise to her long after she was gone. I only wish I had understood sooner what our son had become while I was busy protecting him from his own inheritance. It was a Tuesday morning, 1 week to the day since I had stood in a rented tuxedo and watched Nathan marry a woman named Camille. I was in my living room, peacefully repairing the brass gears of an old grandfather clock, my reading glasses on the bridge of my nose, my hands stained with a little oil. The rhythmic ticking of the mechanism was the only sound in the house. Then, the silence was shattered by the aggressive crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up through the front window. A pristine black Mercedes rolled into my driveway and stopped right behind my weathered truck. The doors opened. Out stepped Camille, my new daughter-in-law, in a sharp white designer suit, her eyes hidden behind oversized dark sunglasses. She did not look like a woman bringing leftover wedding cake. Her jaw was tight. Her posture was rigid. Out of the driver's side stepped a man I had never seen before. Late 30s, tailored navy suit, thick leather briefcase, the unmistakable predatory posture of a corporate lawyer. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out onto the porch, the old planks groaning under my boots. I offered a warm, welcoming smile. "Camille," I called, shielding my eyes from the sun. "This is a surprise. Where is Nathan?" She did not smile back. She did not take off her sunglasses. She walked up the stone path and stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, keeping a careful distance, as if I were carrying something contagious. She said nothing at all. She simply gestured to the man beside her, a small flick of the hand, signaling him to take over. The lawyer stepped up onto my porch, opened his briefcase, and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the patio table. "Mr. Prescott," the man said, his voice cold and rehearsed and empty of any human warmth. "My name is Dorian Kessler. I represent the new owners of this property. I am here to formally serve you notice." I frowned, genuinely confused, looking from the envelope to him to Camille. "New owners? What are you talking about? I have owned this house for 40 years. The mortgage was paid off 2 decades ago." He adjusted his tie and looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation. "Not anymore, sir. This property has been legally transferred and sold. You have exactly 72 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate. If you are still here by 8 o'clock Friday morning, the county sheriff will be called to remove you for trespassing." The words hung in the air. 72 hours. Vacate. Trespassing. A sharp ringing filled my ears. I looked at Camille. She was staring past me, inspecting a chipped spot of paint on my porch railing, looking utterly bored by the destruction of my life. "Camille," I said, my voice dropping to a low rasp, "what is this? Where is my son?" She finally turned her gaze to me and let out a heavy sigh, the kind you give a stubborn toddler. "Nathan is busy at the office, Gerald. He could not be here for the drama. The house is sold. It is done. Dorian is just doing his job. You should start packing instead of asking pointless questions." My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden, terrifying surge of adrenaline. I reached down, picked up the envelope, and tore it open. Inside was a stack of legal documents, deeds of transfer, a quitclaim, sale agreements. I flipped to the last page, and my breath caught in my throat. At the bottom of the page was a red county notary seal. Right beside it, a power of attorney declaration granting full authority to liquidate all real estate in my name. And right above the dotted line was my signature, Gerald Prescott. It was a perfect match. The sweeping loop of the G, the sharp angles, exactly how I signed my checks and my tax returns. Flawless. Except for one horrifying detail. I had never signed that paper in my life. I stared at the black ink, and the realization crashed into me like a falling beam. This was not a mistake. This was not a bank mix-up. This was a deliberate, calculated, illegal forgery. And there was only one person on earth with access to my old tax returns and my filing cabinets. Someone who could trace my signature that perfectly. My own son. Nathan. The boy I taught to ride a bicycle in that very driveway. I brought the page close to my reading glasses and studied that signature the way I would study a fractured weld on a failed beam. Whoever had done this had not rushed. They had studied my handwriting with a terrifying dedication. The upward slant of the capital G, the sharp cross on the T, the way the ink trailed off at the tail of the double L. A bank teller would have approved it without a second thought. But I know my own hand. And more than that, I know the mechanics of ink laid down under pressure. My real signature has momentum. It is written, fast and unbroken, by a hand that has done it 10,000 times without thinking. This signature had no momentum at all. It had been drawn, slowly and carefully, one deliberate stroke at a time. It was a forgery so good, it was very nearly perfect. And in my line of work, very nearly perfect is simply another way of saying it will eventually fail. The lawyer tapped his expensive watch. "I suggest you start calling movers, Mr. Prescott. The buyers are eager to begin renovations. Do not attempt to contact my clients again. All communication goes through my office." He set a glossy business card on the table. Camille turned on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the stone, and walked back to the Mercedes without a single glance back. The engine roared, and the SUV reversed out of my driveway in a cloud of white dust. I stood alone on my porch. The morning sun was warm on my shoulders, but my whole body felt like ice. My own son and his wife of 1 week had just ambushed me. They had forged a federal document. They had stolen the house I built with my own hands, and they were throwing me out like a stray dog, certain I was a poor, defenseless old pensioner who would simply surrender. But a strange, eerie calm began to settle over me, the same calm I used to feel standing in front of a collapsed structure. Decades of engineering had trained me to meet catastrophe with cold, detached logic. When a bridge fails, you do not stand in the wreckage and weep. You isolate the point of failure. You trace the fracture back to its origin. My point of failure, it seemed, had been my blind, unconditional trust in my own son. I walked back inside and closed the heavy oak door with a solid, familiar click. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, but now each tick felt like a countdown. 72 hours to erase 40 years of my life. I understood exactly why they had chosen that number. 72 hours is a weapon. It is designed to induce panic, to keep a victim frantically hunting for moving boxes instead of a competent lawyer. They wanted me disoriented, exhausted, and humiliated, hauling trash bags into my truck before the weekend was over. Because they knew perfectly well that if I had time to think, if I had time to fight that forged power of attorney in front of a federal judge, it would not survive for a single second. Their only real advantage was speed, and their only real assumption was that a 70-year-old widower on a fixed pension had neither the money nor the stamina to fight a well-funded law firm. They assumed I would bow my head, pack my memories into cheap cardboard, and disappear into whatever low-income housing I could scrape together. I leaned back against the granite island and let out a slow, steady breath. The naive father who had stood in a tuxedo 7 days ago was gone. He had died on that porch the moment Camille refused to take off her sunglasses. In his place stood a man with a hidden $78 million fortune and unlimited patience. But before I could dismantle them, I needed to hear my son's voice. I needed to hear exactly how he would justify this nightmare. I picked up the old landline, took a breath to mask the fire in my chest, and dialed. "Dad," Nathan answered, remarkably calm. There was no surprise in his voice, no hesitation. He sounded like a man waiting for a scripted cue. "Nathan," I said, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound overwhelmed. "What is happening? Camille was here with a lawyer. They handed me papers saying I have to leave my house in 3 days. Please tell me this is a terrible misunderstanding." I waited for the crack in his facade. Instead, I heard a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Dad, please calm down. I know this is a shock. I wanted to tell you in person, but I was afraid of how you would react. We had no other choice." "No other choice," I echoed, leaning on the counter to sell the illusion of a broken man. "This is my home. You forged my signature, Nathan. You sold my house." "Dad, stop," he interrupted gently. "Nobody forged anything. You signed those papers last month. You just do not remember." The sheer audacity of the gaslighting took my breath away. "I do not remember," I said, letting my voice crack. "What are you talking about?" "It is the dementia, Dad," he replied, his tone sliding into the patronizing cadence you use with a frightened child. The doctor warned Camille and me, your memory lapses are getting dangerous. Do you not remember the stove fire last week? You left a towel on the burner. You nearly burned the house down. If we had not stopped by, you could have died. We cannot let you live alone anymore. I closed my eyes. The stove fire. The memory played back with perfect clarity. Nathan had come over to make soup. He had asked me to go out to the garage to find an old socket wrench for him, and while I was outside, he must have laid that towel across the burner himself. He had engineered a fire hazard to build a fake medical record against me, right in front of my face. I did not leave a towel on the stove, Nathan, I whispered, injecting a desperate plea into my voice. You were cooking. You sent me to the garage. See, this is exactly what the doctor warned us about, he said, his voice brimming with counterfeit heartbreak. You are inventing memories to fill the blanks. It breaks my heart, Dad. But it proves we made the right choice. We sold the house to secure you a place in a premier assisted living facility. Round-the-clock care. We did this to save your life. The words sounded luxurious, responsible, and completely fake. I knew exactly what my house was worth, and I knew what those facilities cost, and the math did not add up. If they had truly bought me a place, they would not have sent a corporate lawyer with a 72-hour eviction notice and a threat about the sheriff. Nathan, please, I forced a sob into my throat. You built this house with your mother. Her garden is here. You cannot pack me away like an old piece of furniture. The line went quiet for a second. Then his voice returned, stripped of all warmth, cold and pragmatic. Dad, Mom is gone. If she were here, she would agree with us. You are sick. You need to accept that. The movers come Monday at 8. Have your clothes packed. Do not take any of the furniture. It was included in the sale. Then he hung up. I placed the receiver back on the hook, and the soft plastic click echoed through the empty hallway. They had stolen my past, and they believed they had dictated my future. They were terribly, terribly mistaken. I splashed cold water on my face at the kitchen sink and stared at my reflection in the dark window above the faucet. I was old, yes, but I was very far from finished. Playing the confused victim had bought me exactly what I needed: time. Now I needed information, and I needed it from a level these two children could not even imagine. I walked down the hall to my bedroom, gripped the heavy oak wardrobe that had belonged to my father, and slid it smoothly aside on the hidden casters I had installed years ago. It revealed a plain section of floorboard, and beneath it, the biometric scanner of my floor safe. I pressed my thumb to the glass. The steel lock disengaged with a deep, satisfying thud. Inside lay a few stacks of currency, some of Rosalind's heirloom jewelry, and a small black case. I lifted out the case and unsnapped it, revealing a sleek, encrypted satellite phone, the kind normally reserved for executives operating in hostile territory. I had bought it years ago to manage the Prescott Trust, so that none of my financial movements ever touched a vulnerable local network. I carried it to my recliner, powered it on, and dialed a long sequence of numbers from memory. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Mr. Prescott. It was Rhea Castellano, the senior wealth manager of the trust. She was brilliant and absolutely ruthless, one of the very few people alive who knew the true scale of my resources. It is late in Ohio, Gerald, she said. I trust this is not a social call. It is not, I replied, and I let my voice drop into its natural, authoritative register. The frail, confused old man who had spoken to Nathan an hour ago was entirely gone. I need you to initiate a total, scorched-earth financial audit, and I need it immediately. The targets are Nathan Prescott and Camille Prescott. I heard the shift in her breathing. The pleasantries vanished. My own son, I continued, feeling a cold satisfaction. They committed federal wire fraud to drain $62,000 from my public pension account, and they used a forged power of attorney to illegally sell this house. I want your forensic team to dig into every credit card, every wire transfer, every mortgage, every tax return for the last 5 years. They are desperate for cash, Rhea. I need to know exactly who they owe and how much. Your son forged a deed to steal your home? Her voice sharpened with professional outrage. Gerald, that is a serious federal offense. I can have my legal team file an injunction by dawn and freeze the sale. I can have authorities at his door before he finishes his coffee. No, I commanded. Do not touch the sale. Do not alert the authorities. If you block it now, they will panic and scatter, and I will never learn who is pulling their strings. I want them to believe they have won. This audit must be completely covert. I need the anatomy of their desperation. Understood, she said, adjusting instantly. My team will use ghost protocols, no fingerprints. Timeline? 24 hours, I said, staring at the face of the grandfather clock. The movers come Monday. I need the full dossier by tomorrow night. I need to know exactly what kind of monster is chasing them, because I intend to feed them straight to it. I ended the call and set the heavy phone down. The financial bloodhounds were off their leash now, silently tracking my son's every digital move. But while Rhea waged an invisible war, I still had a performance to maintain in the physical world. I knew my neighborhood. People watch. If Nathan sent someone to check on my progress, I needed to look like a defeated, compliant victim. So I went to the garage, brought in a stack of flattened moving boxes, and assembled a few of them right in front of the living room window, where anyone driving past could see them. Then I opened my nightstand and pulled out 2 miniature audio recorders, tools I had bought decades ago to dictate engineering notes in tight industrial spaces. They were tiny, sensitive, and could run continuously for days. I slipped them into my jacket. Then I picked up my phone, cleared my throat, and dialed Camille, forcing my voice into something small and pleading. Camille answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear a spa fountain trickling somewhere behind her. I told her I understood now. I told her I was too old and too tired to fight, and that I only wanted the chance to say a proper goodbye to the house before Monday. I asked if she and Nathan would come by on Saturday evening so I could hand over the keys with dignity and not make a scene in front of the movers. I heard the smile spread across her voice. Greedy people simply cannot resist a victory lap. Of course, Gerald, she said, warm as poured honey. We would love that. It shows real maturity. She was already savoring it. I thanked her, hung up, and placed the 2 miniature recorders in the 2 rooms where they would most likely speak freely: the study and the kitchen. Then, I waited. Saturday evening, they arrived in the black Mercedes, and I played my part flawlessly. I shuffled my feet. I called Nathan by the wrong name once and let him correct me with a pitying little smile. I let Camille wander through my house, touching things she already planned to sell, opening drawers, holding Rosalind's silver up to the light and murmuring prices under her breath. I served them coffee in my own kitchen, and I pretended not to notice when they exchanged a look over my bowed head, the look of 2 hunters standing over a kill. And the entire time, 2 small, patient machines sat silent inside the walls, recording every careless and arrogant word. When they finally rose to leave, Camille reached out and pressed a folded $50 bill into my shirt pocket. For a cab to the facility on Monday, she said sweetly. We would not want you getting lost. I thanked her softly, and I kept the bill. The dossier arrived on Rhea's encrypted server the following night, and it rewrote the entire story. Nathan and Camille were not wealthy. They were not upgrading to some brighter future. They were broke. Catastrophically, suffocatingly broke. Their whole lavish lifestyle was a hollow facade built on a mountain of debt, and the pressure had finally crushed them. The rushed house sale, the forged documents, the stolen pension money, all of it was a panicked scramble to survive. They needed cash immediately, which meant they were terrified of someone. The forensic trail led to a private lending syndicate, the kind that does not operate by any law you would find in a courthouse. Nathan had borrowed heavily against a failed venture of Camille's, and the balance had ballooned past $5 million. The syndicate had stopped sending emails. They had started sending men. Ria's team traced the money the way you trace a crack through a foundation, patiently, from the visible surface all the way down to the hidden origin. Nathan had funneled Camille's failed cosmetics venture through 2 shell companies in Nevada, borrowed against inventory that never existed, and when the banks finally said no, he had turned to people who never say no. The debt had a name attached to it now, a lender who collected in broken bones as easily as in interest. Twice in the last month, black cars had parked outside Nathan's rented condo at 3 a.m. and simply idled there until dawn, a message that needed no words. My son was not a predator at all. He was prey, cornered and terrified, and he had decided that the fastest way out of the jaws closing around him was to shove his own father into them first. That was the true anatomy of his desperation, and I fully intended to use every inch of it. And then Ria's team pulled the file that shattered my world. Buried in an encrypted message thread on Camille's cloud account was the true plan. The house and the pension were never going to be enough to clear a $5 million debt. But my death would. There was a life insurance policy Nathan had quietly taken out on me a year earlier, forged consent and all. And there was correspondence with a so-called relocation service, a group that made inconvenient people disappear for a fee. The plan was never to move me into an assisted living facility. The plan was to load me into a transport van on Monday morning, drive me across the state line, and make sure I never arrived anywhere at all. They had sat at their kitchen table and priced the remainder of my natural life at exactly $5 million. My son had done the math on my murder and decided it balanced his books. I sat in the dark living room for a long time after I read it. I did not shout. I did not weep. Somewhere in my chest, the last thread connecting me to the boy I raised simply snapped, quietly and completely. Then I picked up the satellite phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Ria, to release everything: the forgery, the wire fraud, the insurance policy, the murder correspondence. To a federal contact she had cultivated for exactly this kind of moment, a financial crimes agent who understood the value of catching people in the act. The second call was to let the plan proceed. I did not run. I did not hide. I told Nathan, in my smallest, most defeated voice, that I would be ready and packed on Monday morning. I wanted them to walk through my front door believing they had won. I wanted the van in the driveway. I wanted every one of them exactly where the evidence could reach them. The agent's name was Ruiz, and she had spent 11 years building cases exactly like this one, watching wealthy families quietly devour their own. She did not want to move early. She wanted the transport van in the driveway and the forged papers in the lawyer's hand, everyone present, everyone committed, caught in the exact moment of the act. So we waited together through the weekend, she in an unmarked car 2 streets over, me in my recliner, both of us listening to the same clock tick toward Monday. It was the strangest weekend of my life. I ate my meals, I watered Rosalind's garden, I repaired the last worn gear in the grandfather clock and set it running true again. And for the first time since that black Mercedes pulled into my driveway, I felt completely and perfectly calm. On Sunday, a silver sedan I did not recognize crawled past my house 3 separate times. Each time I made sure to be visible through the front window, taping another box shut, wrapping a picture frame in old newspaper. The very picture of a defeated old man surrendering his life 1 carton at a time. Let them look. Let them drive back and report that the old fool was folding exactly as planned. Every box I taped was another hour of their false confidence, and false confidence is the single most expensive mistake a criminal can make. I had spent a whole career watching enormous structures fail, and they almost always fail the same way. Not because the load is too heavy, but because someone was too arrogant to inspect the joints. Nathan and Camille had never once inspected the joints. They had no idea that the quiet old man in the window was the one load they had failed to account for. That night, I sat alone in my recliner with a glass of Rosalind's favorite bourbon, and I listened to the recordings. I listened to my son and his wife in my own kitchen laughing. I listened to Camille complain that the old man was taking far too long to die on his own. I listened to Nathan say the word van and the word warehouse, and the phrase, "After Monday, there is no Gerald left to worry about." I listened to them divide up my dead wife's jewelry between careless sips of my coffee. A lesser man might have shattered, hearing his only child plan his murder in such a cheerful voice. But I was no longer listening as a father. I was listening as an engineer, cataloging every stress fracture and every load-bearing lie, assembling the case that would bring their entire structure crashing down on top of them. When the last recording ended, I saved 3 copies, sent them to Rhea and Agent Ruiz, and then I slept more deeply than I had in months. Monday morning came clear and bright. At 8 o'clock sharp, the moving truck rolled up to the curb and a plain white transport van parked directly behind it. Nathan walked up my porch steps first, followed by Camille in her sunglasses, followed by the lawyer, Dorian Kessler, clutching his briefcase of forged papers. They found me sitting calmly in my leather recliner, dressed not in the rumpled clothes of a broken old man, but in a pressed charcoal suit. Nathan stopped in the doorway, confused. "Dad, why are you dressed like that?" I did not answer. I simply looked at him, and for the first time in years, he truly saw me. Not a slipping invalid, not an easy mark. A structural engineer who had spent his whole life learning exactly how a thing collapses, and precisely where to stand when it does. That was when the federal agents stepped out of my kitchen and my back hallway where they had been waiting since before dawn. 2 of them took Nathan by the collar and swept his arms behind his back, the steel handcuffs ratcheting shut with a sharp, final click. A second pair secured Camille, ignoring her hysterical thrashing and her screaming about lawyers. Dorian Kessler simply sat down on my floor and began to cry. For a moment, the only sounds in my living room were the steady ticking of the grandfather clock and the ragged breathing of 3 people watching their entire scheme collapse in real time. Camille kept insisting there had been a mistake, that her husband was a successful man, that these people had no idea who they were dealing with. She was right about that last part, at least. They had never once known who they were dealing with. Agent Ruiz stepped in front of her, raised a tablet, and calmly played 11 seconds of audio. My son's cheerful voice saying the words about the van and the warehouse and the morning after Monday. Camille stopped talking. The blood drained out of her face all at once, and she finally understood that the confused old man she had pitied had been listening to every careless word she spoke inside his own walls. Nathan dropped to his knees. He crawled across the rug and grabbed the fabric at my knees, his face a wet mask of panic. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "You cannot send me to federal prison. I am your only boy. I was desperate. The syndicate was going to kill me. I panicked. But I am still your flesh and blood. Give me one more chance. I will pay back every cent." I looked down at the weeping man clutching at my legs. For one brief second, a ghost of a memory flashed through my mind. A small, bright-eyed boy on a bicycle in the driveway. My hand steady on the seat. My promise that I would always keep him safe. But that boy had died a long time ago, replaced by the man on my floor. My heart felt as cold and impenetrable as glacial ice. I reached down, gripped his wrists, and peeled his hands off my suit. "You stopped being my son," I said, my voice quiet and absolutely final. "The moment you sat at a kitchen table and priced the rest of my life at $5 million. You did not make a mistake, Nathan. You made a choice. And now, you are going to pay the exact price for it." I gave a small nod to the agents. They hauled him to his feet, and I did not stay to watch them read his rights. Before I walked out, I stopped beside Camille. She was still spitting curses through her tears while an agent held her wrists behind her back. I reached into my shirt pocket and drew out the folded $50 bill she had pressed on me 2 nights earlier in this very house while she priced my wife's silver. I held it between 2 fingers, exactly the way she had, and I let it fall. It fluttered down through the quiet morning air and landed softly against her handcuffed hands. "For a cab," I said, my voice cold and even. "We would not want you getting lost." I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out into the bright morning light with my head held high. Ria Castellano fell into step beside me, a rare flicker of respect on her face. The 2 confused movers were still leaning against their truck, smoking cigarettes, staring at the swarm of federal vehicles. I did not spare them a glance. A black town car idled at the curb, and the driver hurried to open my door. I slid into the leather interior, and Ria climbed in beside me, already pulling out her tablet to untangle the wreckage. I looked one last time at the modest house where I had lived for 40 years. It held nothing for me now. It was just an empty wooden box, finally purged of the parasites who had plotted to end my life inside it. Nathan took a plea rather than face a jury with a murder-for-hire file, and he is serving 15 years in a federal facility where the syndicate he feared can no longer reach him, and neither can my forgiveness. Camille was convicted of conspiracy and fraud, her designer world reduced to a cell and a public defender. The lawyer lost his license and his freedom in the same week. Nathan writes to me from prison, of course. The letters arrive stamped with the seal of the federal system, full of apologies that read like the regret of a man sorry he was caught, rather than sorry for what he did. He complains about the concrete walls, the lost lifestyle, the friends who vanished the instant the handcuffs appeared. I read every letter carefully, and I answer none of them. As for the syndicate my son had been so desperate to feed me to, it was quietly dismantled by the same federal team that arrested him, its books opened and its leadership indicted. Because a forensic trail does not politely stop at the first door it finds. In the end, my son handed the government the very monster he had spent months running from. That is the strange arithmetic of greed. It always, eventually, balances against the person who first set it in motion. And I finally did the one thing I had never allowed myself to do. I opened Rosalind's trust. I used a piece of that fortune to fund a scholarship for young engineers in her name. Brilliant kids with no money and no one behind them. Exactly the kind of person she had once been. The rest I am simply living on in a quiet house by the water, where the clocks still tick, and no one knows my worth unless I choose to tell them. Family is often called our safest harbor, but blood alone guarantees nothing. Respect is earned through integrity, never through entitlement. And when greed overshadows love, even the closest bond can rot from the inside out. My son mistook my age for weakness and my silence for surrender. This is a work of fiction, and the voice you have been listening to is not a living man. But the lesson beneath it is as real as steel. You cannot save a person who is actively working to destroy you. Sometimes, stepping back and letting them meet the full weight of their own choices is the only way left to protect your peace. They wanted my inheritance. In the end, the only thing they inherited was the ruin they earned with their own hands. My name is Gerald Prescott, and the fortune they tried to kill me for, I gave to the world in my wife's name.